The first thing I noticed wasn't the woman. It was the blood, a dark crimson stain on the impossible white of the blizzard. It was December 1875, Wyoming territory, and a storm like this wasn't just weather, it was a hungry animal, and it was looking for a meal. I'd been a fool to check on my cattle, but a deeper fool to ignore the sound I heard on the wind. It wasn't a coyote, and it wasn't the scream of the storm tearing at the pines. It was human. I swung down from my horse, Ghost, the wind trying to rip the hat from my head. Every step was a battle, the snow already up to my knees. And then I saw it, a wagon, tipped on its side, its canvas shredded like a prayer flag in a hurricane, and next to it, that splash of red in the snow. My heart hammered against my ribs. I'd seen enough blood in the war to last 10 lifetimes. I drew the Colt from my hip, my hands steady despite the cold that was sinking into my bones. You never knew what you'd find out here. Bandits, scavengers, or something worse. I crept closer, the crunch of my boots swallowed by the gale. The blood trail led from the wagon to a snowdrift, a mound that looked wrong. It was too smooth, too deliberate. I reached the overturned wagon and peered under the ripped canvas. And that's when I saw her, huddled in the darkness, a woman. Her hair was the color of summer honey, now matted with ice. Her face was pale, almost blue, and her eyes were closed. For a second, I thought she was gone. Another body for the spring thaw to reveal. But then her chest hitched, a tiny, shallow breath. She was alive. But the question that screamed in my mind, louder than the blizzard itself, wasn't about her. It was about the blood. There wasn't a mark on her, not a scratch. So if the blood wasn't hers, whose was it? I didn't have time to ponder. The storm was getting worse and she was fading fast. I holstered my Colt, pushed aside the thought of the blood, and knelt beside her. Her clothes were for a different world, a city somewhere warm. They were thin, useless against the teeth of a Wyoming winter. "Ma'am," I said, my voice hoarse, "can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered. They opened just a crack, and I saw eyes the color of a thunderhead, a swirling blue-gray. They looked at me, but I wasn't sure she was really seeing me. More like she was looking through me. "He's gone," she whispered, her voice like cracking ice. "Who's gone?" I asked, leaning in closer. "My husband," she breathed, and a single tear froze on her cheek. "He went for help." Well, that answered that, or so I thought. The blood must be from an animal then. Maybe a horse had broken its leg. It didn't matter. All that mattered was the woman in front of me. I wrapped my heavy sheepskin coat around her frail shoulders and lifted her into my arms. She weighed next to nothing, like a bird with hollow bones. I carried her to Ghost, settled her in the saddle, and mounted behind her, pulling her back against my chest to share what little warmth I had left. The ride back to my cabin was a nightmare. The world had disappeared, replaced by a swirling vortex of white. I navigated by instinct alone, by the feel of the land under Ghost's hooves. The woman was unconscious again, her head lolling against my shoulder. I wasn't just fighting for my life anymore. I was fighting for hers. When the dark shape of my cabin finally emerged from the snow, I almost wept with relief. I carried her inside, laid her gently on my cot, and worked fast. I piled wood into the hearth, and soon a roaring fire was beating back the deadly cold. Her dress was soaked through. I knew I had to get her out of it, or the cold would take her for good. With as much decency as the situation allowed, I cut away the wet fabric. And that's when I saw it. The second secret she was keeping, the gentle, unmistakable swell of her belly. She wasn't just a lone woman lost in a storm. She was pregnant. And the father, the husband who had supposedly gone for help, he was nowhere to be found. I pulled my thickest wool blankets over her, my mind spinning. A pregnant woman abandoned in a blizzard. What kind of monster would do that? I felt a surge of cold fury that had nothing to do with the storm. I pulled a chair to her bedside and sat, the Colt resting on my lap. I didn't know who she was or what trouble she was in, but I made a vow right then and there. She wouldn't die. Not on my watch. She slept for a full day and a night. The blizzard raged outside, sealing us in, a tiny bubble of warmth in a world of ice. I broth-fed her when she stirred, spoonfuls of hot liquid she took without ever truly waking. I watched the rise and fall of her chest, watched the color slowly return to her cheeks. She was beautiful, in a fragile, haunted way, like a porcelain doll that had seen too much. On the morning of the second day, I woke from a doze in my chair to find her eyes on me, those storm gray eyes. They were clear now, and sharp. "You saved me," she said. Her voice was stronger. I nodded. "Wyatt Keller. And you are?" "Willow," she said. "Willow Green. My husband. Did you find him?" "His name is Thomas." I shook my head, my gut twisting. "There was no one else out there, ma'am. Just you and the wagon." I didn't mention the blood. No sense in scaring her more than she already was. Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them back. I saw a flicker of steel in her gaze that hadn't been there before. "He promised he'd come back," she whispered, more to herself than to me. She clutched her stomach, a protective, instinctual gesture. "You're safe here," I told her. "You and the little one. You can stay as long as you need." For the next few days, a strange sort of peace settled over the cabin. We were two strangers, trapped by the storm, but we found a rhythm. I tended the livestock in the barn, fighting my way through the drifts, while she, despite my protests, insisted on cooking. She took my simple stores, beans, flour, salted pork, and turned them into meals that made the cabin feel like a home. She told me her story in bits and pieces. They were traveling to California, she and Thomas. They had a small piece of land waiting for them, a new life. They'd been so close. He was a good man, she said. Strong, kind. He would never have left her if he had a choice. I listened, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Her grief felt real, her fear palpable. And the baby, well, the baby was a constant, silent testament to their love story. But there was a part of my brain, a part that had kept me alive in the war, that wouldn't let things go. The blood in the snow, Thomas vanishing without a trace. It just didn't sit right. It was a loose thread on a perfectly woven blanket, and I couldn't stop myself from wanting to pull it. On the fourth day, the storm broke. The sun came out, blindingly bright on the fresh snow. The world was silent, clean, and new. "I have to go back," I told her over breakfast, "to see if I can salvage anything from your wagon." Her face lit up with hope. "Our things, my mother's locket, and Thomas. Maybe there's a sign, a clue to where he went." "I'll look," I promised, though I knew the chances of finding a man alive after 4 days in that blizzard were zero. The ride out was surreal. The landscape was transformed, a sea of rolling white dunes. It took me an hour to find the spot. The wagon was almost completely buried now, only a single broken wheel sticking out of the snow like a tombstone. I spent the better part of the morning digging. I found a small trunk, its lock frozen solid. I managed to pry it open and found dresses, a worn Bible, and a silver hairbrush. Willow's things, but nothing belonging to a man. No clothes, no tools, no shaving kit. It was strange. I was about to give up when my boot hit something hard beneath the snow, about 20 yards from the wagon. I knelt and dug with my bare hands, the cold biting at my fingers. It was a man. He was frozen solid, his face a mask of blue ice, his eyes wide open in a final, silent scream. His coat was torn open, and I could see the dark, frozen stain on his shirt where the blood had poured out. He'd been shot, point blank, right in the chest. My blood ran cold. This had to be Thomas, her husband. But she said he went for help. She never said he was shot. Was she lying? Or did she just not know? Then I saw the leather wallet half tucked into his waistband. My fingers were numb, but I managed to pull it free. I had to know who this man was. I had to bring his name back to his grieving widow. I fumbled it open. There was a wad of cash inside, more than I'd seen in a year. But I wasn't interested in the money. I was looking for a name, an identification card, anything. Instead, I found a piece of folded paper tucked into a leather sleeve. I pulled it out. My breath caught in my throat. It was a wanted poster. The drawing was rough, but the likeness was unmistakable. High cheekbones, a full mouth, and those stormy gray eyes. The name printed underneath wasn't Willow Green. It was Winifred Gladstone. And the charge wasn't theft or robbery. It was murder. I stared at the poster, my mind refusing to process what I was seeing. The sweet, grieving woman back in my cabin, the pregnant mother-to-be, a killer. And then I read the fine print at the bottom, and the world tilted on its axis. The name of the victim, the man she was wanted for murdering. His name was Silas Croft. I looked from the name on the poster to the frozen face of the dead man at my feet. Then it hit me like a physical blow. The man in the snow wasn't her husband, Thomas. He was the man she'd allegedly killed, which meant her story, every last word of it, was a lie. She wasn't a widow. She was a fugitive. And I wasn't her rescuer. I was her hiding place. The ride back to the cabin was the longest of my life. The wanted poster felt like it was burning a hole through my shirt. Every step Ghost took, a single word echoed in my mind. Murderer. I had a murderer sleeping in my bed. A woman who had looked me in the eye and spun a tale of love and loss, while the body of her victim lay freezing in the snow just a few miles away. And the baby. Whose baby was it? Was there ever a Thomas? Or was he just another part of the lie? My hand kept drifting to the butt of my Colt. The law was clear. I should ride straight to Clearwater, to the nearest marshal, and turn her in. It was my duty, but something held me back. The image of her, pale and shivering under the ripped canvas, the protective way she held her belly, the flicker of steel I'd seen in her eyes. It didn't add up. Or maybe I just didn't want it to. When I walked through the cabin door, the warmth of the fire and the smell of roasting rabbit hit me. She was humming, a soft, gentle tune, as she stirred a pot over the hearth. She looked up and smiled when she saw me, a smile so genuine and bright it made my stomach clench. "You're back," she said, her eyes shining. "Did you find anything?" I dropped the trunk of her belongings on the floor with a thud. I couldn't look at her. I couldn't speak. I walked over to the fireplace, my back to her, trying to get my thoughts in order. "Wyatt?" Her voice was laced with concern. "Is everything all right? You look as though you've seen a ghost." "Maybe I have," I said, my voice low and hard. I turned to face her, my expression like stone. I reached into my shirt and pulled out the folded wanted poster. I let it drop onto the wooden table between us. Her eyes followed it. I watched as the color drained from her face, as her smile dissolved into a mask of pure terror. Her hand flew to her mouth, and a small, strangled gasp escaped her lips. She stared at the drawing of her own face, at the bold black letters spelling out her doom. "So," I said, my voice dangerously quiet, "why don't you tell me who you really are, Winifred?" Her whole body was trembling. She sank into a chair, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if it were the only thing keeping her from collapsing. Her eyes, wide and terrified, darted from the poster to my face. "It's not what you think," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Isn't it?" I shot back, my anger finally boiling over. "There's a man lying dead in the snow out there, Winifred. A man named Silas Croft. The poster says you murdered him, and you've been sitting here, in my home, eating my food, telling me sad stories about a husband who doesn't even exist. So you tell me, what am I supposed to think?" Tears streamed down her face, silent and desperate. "Please," she begged, "you have to let me explain." "Explain?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Explain how you put a bullet in a man's chest? Explain why you lied to me from the second I found you?" "Because I was scared," she cried out, her voice cracking. "What was I supposed to do? Tell the first man I see that I'm a wanted woman with a dead body on my trail? The truth might have been a good start," I roared, slamming my fist on the table. The dishes rattled and she flinched back as if I'd struck her. I took a deep breath, trying to rein in my rage. I was scaring her, and that wasn't going to get me any answers. I sat down opposite her, forcing my voice to be level. "Start from the beginning, the real beginning, and don't you dare lie to me again. Who was Silas Croft?" She wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her gaze fixed on the dancing flames in the hearth. "He was a bounty hunter," she said, her voice flat and defeated. "He tracked me from St. Louis." "Why? What did you do in St. Louis?" "I was framed," she said, looking up at me, her eyes pleading for me to believe her. "There was a man. His name was Henry Williams. His father owns the biggest bank in the city. We were involved. I waited, saying nothing. He was charming, she continued, a bitter twist to her lips. He promised me everything. Marriage, a family. I believed him. And when I told him I was pregnant, her voice broke. She took a shuddering breath and went on. He changed. He offered me money to disappear. He said his father would never approve of him marrying a seamstress. He said I would ruin his life. So you took the money and ran? I guessed. No, she insisted, her eyes flashing with the same steel I'd seen before. I refused. This baby is his child. I wanted him to acknowledge his own flesh and blood, not pay me off like I was nothing. So what happened? I pressed, leaning forward. He set me up, she whispered. He told me to meet him at the bank late one night. He said he'd make it right. He gave me a bag with some money, told me it was enough to start a new life until he could sort things out with his father. I was a fool. I believed him. The next day, the bank reported $5,000 stolen, and all the evidence pointed to me. They found some of the marked bills hidden in my room. It was his word against mine. Who was the town going to believe? The story was plausible. Too plausible. It was the kind of thing powerful men did to powerless women all the time, but it didn't explain the dead man in the snow. That's a long way from theft to murder, Winifred. My name is Willow, she said fiercely. It's the only thing I have left that's truly mine, and I didn't murder him. There's a bullet hole in his chest that says otherwise. He found me just before the blizzard hit. He was going to take me back to a hangman's noose. I begged him. I told him I was innocent, that I was pregnant. He didn't care. He was cruel. He tried to force himself on me. Her voice dropped to a barely audible whisper. We struggled. His gun. It was tucked in his belt. It fell into the snow. I grabbed it. I told him to stay back. He just laughed. He lunged at me and it went off. I didn't mean to kill him. I swear it. I was just trying to protect myself. To protect my baby. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent sobs. I stared at her, my mind a battlefield. On one side was the evidence, the lie, the dead body, the wanted poster. On the other was a woman, terrified and alone, telling a story of betrayal and desperation. A story that, if true, made her a victim, not a killer. The law would call it murder. But out here in the territories, we had a different name for it. We called it survival. My hand rested on the wanted poster. I could still turn her in. It would be the safe thing to do, the right thing to do. But then I looked at her, curled in on herself, her hands protectively wrapped around her unborn child. And I thought of Henry Williams, the rich banker's son, who bought his way out of responsibility. I thought of men like him, men who believed their money and their name put them above common decency. I'd fought a whole war against men like that. I picked up the wanted poster. Her sobbing stopped. She looked up, her eyes wide with fear, watching to see what I would do. Slowly, deliberately, I crumpled the paper in my fist. I walked over to the hearth and tossed the ball of paper into the flames. We both watched as the image of her face blackened, curled, and turned to ash. There is no Winifred Gladstone, I said, my voice rough. She died in the storm. The only person in this cabin is Willow Green, a widow traveling to California who got caught in a blizzard. Do you understand? Tears of a different kind now streamed down her face. Tears of shock, of disbelief, of a gratitude so profound it was painful to look at. She could only nod, unable to speak. Get some rest, I said, my voice softer now. We have a lot to figure out. I had made my decision. I was harboring a fugitive. I was obstructing justice. I had lied to the law and made myself an accessory to whatever crime she had or hadn't committed. And the most terrifying part? I wasn't sorry, not one bit. I had chosen my side, and I would live or die with the consequences. The days that followed were thick with unspoken tension. The blizzard had passed, but we were still trapped, this time by an invisible wall of secrets and suspicion. I had burned the wanted poster, but I hadn't burned the doubt from my mind. I watched her. I watched the way she moved, the way she spoke, looking for any crack in her new story. But she was a fortress. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended my torn shirts. She was the perfect picture of a grieving widow, and if I didn't know better, I would have believed her completely. But I did know better. I knew she was capable of lying. I knew she was capable of killing. Every time she picked up a kitchen knife to chop vegetables, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. Every time she walked behind my chair, my muscles tensed. Living with her was like living with a wolf I'd mistaken for a stray dog. Beautiful, yes, but wild and dangerous, and I never knew when she might bite. One evening she was by the fire, knitting something small from a ball of yarn she'd found in her trunk. Baby clothes. "You're very kind," she said softly, not looking up from her work. "To have taken me in, to have believed me." "I didn't say I believed you," I replied, sharpening a skinning knife by the lamplight. The scrape of stone on steel filled the silence. "I said Winifred Gladstone died in the storm. That's a different thing entirely." She looked up then, her stormy eyes meeting mine. "So you think I'm lying?" "I think you're a survivor," I said carefully, "and survivors do what they have to. They tell the stories they need to tell." A flicker of something, anger, hurt, crossed her face. "And what story do you think I need to tell, Wyatt?" "The one that keeps you alive," I said simply. "The one that keeps you out of a jail cell. The one that protects your child." We stared at each other across the small cabin, two wary animals circling one another. I had the power to destroy her with a single word to the law. And she had a story that might be true or might be the most cunning lie I'd ever heard. And I realized in that moment, she was the one with all the power, because she had me questioning the one thing I always trusted, my own gut. Just when I thought the fragile truce between us might last until the spring thaw, trouble came riding over the horizon. It was a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the blizzard. I was splitting wood in the yard when I saw him, a lone rider coming in from the east. He wasn't from around here. I knew every rancher and trapper in a 50-mile radius, and this man was a stranger. He rode tall in the saddle, and the rifle in his scabbard wasn't for hunting deer. It was for hunting men. I sent Willow inside. "Stay there. Don't make a sound and don't come out, no matter what you hear." Her face was pale with fear. She knew, just like I did, that strangers in this part of the country rarely brought good news. I leaned my axe against the chopping block and waited, my hand resting casually on the Colt at my hip. The rider stopped about 10 yards from me. He was a hard-looking man, with a scar that cut through his left eyebrow and a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He wasn't a lawman. He was something else. "Howdy," he said, his voice like gravel. "Looking for a man named Wyatt Keller." "You found him," I said. "What do you want?" He swung down from his horse, his movements smooth and practiced. "Name's Jedediah Croft. That name mean anything to you?" Croft. My blood turned to ice. It was the same last name as the bounty hunter, the dead man in the snow. This had to be his brother. I kept my face a blank mask. "Can't say that it does." "Should it?" Jedediah's eyes narrowed, scanning my face, my cabin, the barn, looking for any sign of a lie. "My brother, Silas, he was tracking a fugitive, a woman. Last I heard, his trail led up into these mountains, right before that blizzard hit. Haven't heard from him since. Figured I'd ride the trail myself. Ask around." "A lot of folks got lost in that storm," I said, my voice steady. "I ain't seen no stranger, man or woman." He took a step closer, his hand hovering near the pistol on his own hip. "Funny thing is, I found his horse wandering about 10 miles east of here, and I'm a damn good tracker, Keller. I tracked that horse's back trail, and I tracked a second horse. A horse that came from this direction, went out that way, and then came back, right here, to this cabin." He knew. He didn't know everything, but he knew I was lying. My mind raced. I could deny it, but he was a tracker. He'd find the grave where I'd buried his brother. There was only one way to play this. "All right," I said, raising my hand slowly. "You're right. I did find someone. A woman. She was half dead, caught in the storm. I brought her back here." Relief and a cruel sort of triumph washed over his face. "Where is she?" he demanded. "She died," I said, my voice flat. 2 days ago, the cold got into her lungs. There was nothing I could do. I buried her out back. It was a desperate gamble, a lie built on top of a lie. But if he believed me, he might just ride away and leave us be. His eyes bored into me, trying to see through the deception. She died, you say? Just like that? It happens, I said with a shrug. This land is unforgiving. He spat on the ground. She had a bounty on her head, $5,000. That was my money, my brother's money. He paused, his gaze sharpening. Unless you decided to keep her for yourself. Maybe make a deal. Cut my brother out. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my heart pounding. Let me take a look inside your cabin, he sneered, just to be sure. You're not setting foot in my home, I said, my voice dropping. The friendly rancher was gone. This was the man who'd survived Antietam. I think I will, he said, and his hand dropped to his gun. But he never had the chance to draw. Get away from him, Willow's voice. She was standing in the doorway of the cabin, my spare shotgun in her hands, both barrels aimed squarely at Jedediah Croft's chest. Her face was white as a sheet, but her hands were steady and her eyes were blazing with a ferocity I'd never seen before. Jedediah froze, his eyes widening in shock, then settling into a venomous glare. Well, 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 he hissed. Look what we have here. Winifred Gladstone. Looks like you ain't dead after all. The jig was up. The lie was shattered. It was just us and them, in a yard full of freshly fallen snow that was about to be stained red. You're a fool, Keller, Jedediah spat, his eyes flicking between me and Willow. You think you're saving some damsel in distress? You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know she's under my protection, I said, my own hand now gripping the handle of my Colt. You turn your horse around and ride away, Croft. This is your only warning. He laughed, a cold, ugly sound. Right away? I'm not going anywhere without her, or the money she's worth. He looked at Willow, a greedy smile twisting his scarred face. But maybe we can make a new deal. You and me, Keller. We split the bounty, 50-50. You get a pile of cash, and I get my justice. Nobody has to get hurt. It was a tempting offer, a way out. All I had to do was step aside, let him take her. All my problems would vanish. I could go back to my quiet life. But then I looked at Willow. I saw the terror in her eyes, but also the defiance. She hadn't backed down. She was standing her ground, ready to fight. For her life. For her child's life. How could I do any less? There's no deal, I said. Jedediah's smile faded. Wrong answer. Everything happened in a blur. He went for his gun, a flash of steel against the white snow. My own Colt was in my hand before I even realized I'd drawn it. Time seemed to slow down. I saw the flicker of his eyes, the tightening of his finger on the trigger. But a sound ripped through the air before either of us could fire. Not the sharp crack of a pistol, but the deafening boom of a shotgun. Boom! Jedediah staggered back, a look of pure shock on his face. He clutched his shoulder, where a dark red stain was already spreading across his coat. He hadn't been expecting her to shoot. Hell, I hadn't been expecting her to shoot. He tried to raise his pistol, but his arm was useless. He snarled in pain and frustration. The shot hadn't been a kill shot. It was a warning, a painful, bloody warning. He glared at Willow, his eyes filled with pure hatred. You'll pay for that, witch! Then he turned his glare on me. And you, Keller, you've made a powerful enemy today. You think this is about a simple bounty? You're dumber than you look. He staggered back to his horse, pulling himself into the saddle with a grunt of pain. He wheeled the animal around, but before he rode off, he paused and looked back at me. Let me ask you something, he called out, his voice dripping with malice. Why would Henry Williams, the richest man in St. Louis, pay my brother a fortune just to bring back a common thief? He didn't want her for the law. He hired us to bring her back to him. Alive. Now you ask yourself, Keller, why would a man who framed a woman for a crime then pay so much to get her back? He didn't wait for an answer. He spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving a trail of blood drops in the snow. I stood there, my pistol still raised, my ears ringing from the shotgun blast. The immediate danger was gone, but his final words hung in the air, cold and sharp as an icicle. He was right. It didn't make any sense. If Henry Williams just wanted her gone, why not let her run? Why spend a fortune on bounty hunters to track her down? And why did he want her back alive? I turned and looked at Willow. She was lowering the shotgun, her arms trembling from the recoil. The ferocity was gone, replaced by a familiar look of fear. Her story, the one about being a framed seamstress, had just sprung a massive hole. There was another layer to this, something she hadn't told me, something far more dangerous than a simple theft. "Who are you?" I asked again. But this time the question was different. It wasn't angry, it was desperate. "What have you dragged me into, Willow?" She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fresh wave of tears. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry. I never wanted to involve you." "It's too late for that," I said, my voice grim. "His brother won't be back alone. He'll bring friends, or he'll bring the law down on us. We're out of time. I need the truth, the whole truth, right now, or we are both going to end up dead." The cabin felt smaller than ever that night. The silence was a living thing, pressing in on us. Jedediah Croft was gone, but his shadow lingered. He would be back. We both knew it, and we had, at most, a few days before he returned with reinforcements. I stoked the fire, the crackle of the flames the only sound in the room. Willow sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee she wasn't drinking. She hadn't said a word since the confrontation in the yard. Finally, I couldn't stand it anymore. I turned from the fire and faced her. "The story you told me," I began, keeping my voice level, "about Henry Williams, the bank, the frame-up. It's not the whole story, is it?" She wouldn't meet my eyes. She just stared into her coffee cup as if the answers were floating in the murky depths. "His brother asked a good question, Willow. Why would a man who wanted you gone spend a fortune to have you brought back alive? It doesn't add up." She set the mug down with a soft click. When she finally looked up, her face was a mess of exhaustion and despair. The fight had gone out of her. "Because he didn't frame me for theft," she said, her voice hollow. My gut clenched. "So you did steal the money?" "No," she said, shaking her head. "He gave it to me. All of it. The $5,000. It wasn't hush money. It was a settlement." "A settlement for what?" I asked, confused. She took a deep, shuddering breath, the kind you take before you dive into ice-cold water. "I wasn't a seamstress, Wyatt. That was a lie. And Henry Williams wasn't just some wealthy suitor who promised me marriage." She paused, and the confession that came next changed everything. "He was my husband." I stared at her, speechless. My mind reeled, trying to fit this new piece into the puzzle. "Husband?" "We were married in secret," she explained, her voice gaining a bit of strength as the truth finally spilled out. "In a small town 100 miles from St. Louis. He used a different name. He told me his father was a tyrant, that he would disown him if he found out he'd married a woman with no family, no money. I was young. I was in love. I believed him." "So what happened?" I whispered, pulling up a chair and sitting opposite her. "His father found out anyway. He had arranged another marriage for Henry, to the daughter of a railroad baron, a political and financial merger, not a marriage. His father, the senior Mr. Williams, threatened to destroy Henry, to cut him off completely. And Henry, he folded. He chose the money. He chose his family's power over me. He came to me," she continued, her eyes glistening with the memory of the betrayal. "He told me the marriage had to be annulled, that it was never legal. He offered me the $5,000 to sign the papers and disappear, to never speak of our marriage to anyone." "But you were pregnant," I said, the pieces starting to click into place. She nodded, a bitter smile on her lips. "I was pregnant, with his son, his firstborn son, his legitimate heir. And suddenly I wasn't just an inconvenient secret wife anymore. I was a threat to the entire Williams dynasty. My child, this child," she placed a hand on her belly, "would have a legal claim to a portion of the Williams fortune." I finally understood. So the bounty, it wasn't about stolen money. It was never about the money, she confirmed. It was about getting me back, forcing me to sign the papers, forcing me to give up my child. And if I wouldn't, His father is a ruthless man, Wyatt. He would have seen me and my baby silenced. Permanently. The theft charge was just a legal pretense, a way to get the law to do his dirty work for him. It all made sense now. The desperation in her flight, the bounty hunters, Jedediah's words. It wasn't a simple story of a jilted lover. It was a war over a fortune, over a bloodline. And Willow and her unborn child were standing right in the middle of the battlefield. I ran, she said. I took the money he'd given me, and I ran as far and as fast as I could. I changed my name. I bought the wagon. I was heading for California, hoping to disappear before they could find me. But they were faster than I thought. Silence fell between us again, but this time it was different. It wasn't filled with suspicion. It was filled with the weight of the truth, the terrible, heavy truth. She was not a murderer. She was not a thief. She was a mother backed into a corner, fighting for her child against one of the most powerful families in the country. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? I asked, my voice softer now. Would you have believed me? She asked, her gaze steady and direct. A wild story about secret marriages and powerful dynasties? Or would you have believed the wanted poster? Would you have believed the simple story about a scared seamstress? I told you the story I thought you could believe, the one that would keep me safe for another day. She was right. I wouldn't have believed her. Her first lie had been a calculated act of survival. I stood up and began to pace in front of the hearth, my mind racing. Jedediah would be back. The Williams family had resources I couldn't even imagine. They could hire a dozen more bounty hunters. They could buy the local law. A shotgun and a pistol weren't going to be enough. We couldn't fight them head on. We can't stay here, I said, thinking aloud. We have to run. Run where? Willow asked, her voice laced with despair. They'll find me wherever I go. They'll never stop. She was right. Running was just delaying the inevitable. They had to be stopped. Not just beaten, but stopped. Then we don't run, I said, an idea starting to form in my mind. A crazy, desperate idea. We fight, but not with guns. I stopped pacing and looked at her. In the war, I learned something. Sometimes the most powerful weapon isn't a cannon. It's a story. The right story, told to the right person, can do more damage than a whole battalion. What are you talking about? She asked, a flicker of hope in her eyes. This Mr. Williams, I said. He's powerful because of his name, his reputation. He's a pillar of the community, right? What do you think would happen to that reputation if the story of his secret daughter-in-law and his legitimate grandchild, whom he tried to have kidnapped and possibly killed, got out? A slow smile spread across Willow's face as she began to understand. It would ruin him. Exactly, Ann, I said. He's been using a story to hunt you. It's time we use the truth to hunt him. But how? She asked. Who would ever print a story like that? Who would dare go up against the Williams family? I walked over to my writing desk, a small dusty corner of the cabin I rarely used. I pulled out a piece of paper and a pen. I know a guy, I said, a grim smile on my face. An old friend from my cavalry days. He's a newspaper editor now back in St. Louis, and he hates the city's corrupt bankers more than he hates anything in this world. I dipped the pen in ink. We're going to write him a letter, Willow. We're going to give him the story of his career, and we are going to burn the Williams dynasty to the ground. The next 2 days were a race against time. While I wrote the letter, Willow stood watch, the shotgun never far from her hands, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon for any sign of riders. Writing the letter was the hardest thing I'd ever done. We had to get it exactly right. It couldn't sound like the ravings of a mad woman or the bitter lies of a jilted lover. It had to be cold, factual, and irrefutable. Willow provided the details, the date and location of the secret wedding, the name of the preacher who married them, the specific threats Henry and his father had made. I added my own testimony, the account of a decorated Union veteran who had found Willow near death, who had killed one of the Williams hired thugs in self-defense and driven off another. I enclosed the wanted poster for Winifred Gladstone, calling it out for what it was, a fraudulent document used to facilitate a kidnapping. It was a declaration of war, written on a single sheet of paper. Will he believe it? Willow asked, her voice trembling as I sealed the envelope. He'll want to believe it, I said. And that's enough to get him started. Jacob is like a bloodhound. Once he gets the scent of corruption, he doesn't let go. Now came the most dangerous part. The letter was useless here in my cabin. I had to get it to the stagecoach depot in Clearwater, 40 miles away, and I had to do it without Jedediah Croft or his men finding me. I'm coming with you, Willow said. No, I said firmly. It's too dangerous. And in your condition, you need to stay here. Bar the door behind me. If I'm not back in 2 days, you take Ghost, you ride west, and you don't look back. Do you understand? She nodded, her eyes filled with fear. Be careful, Wyatt. Always, I said. I kissed her then, a quick, hard kiss. It wasn't a kiss of passion. It was a kiss of desperation, a promise that I would come back. I rode out under the cover of darkness, pushing my horse hard through the rugged terrain, avoiding the main trails. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every gust of wind sounded like a pursuing rider. The 40-mile ride felt like 1,000. I reached Clearwater just after dawn, a ghost town in the early morning light. I handed the letter and a fistful of dollars to the sleepy-eyed station agent. This has to get on the next coach east, I said. It's a matter of life and death. He nodded, pocketing the money without a second glance. My part was done. The fuse was lit. All we could do now was wait for the explosion. The ride home was even more tense. I felt exposed, vulnerable. I pushed my horse to its limit, my eyes constantly scanning my back trail. I was halfway home, cutting through a dense patch of forest, when I heard it, the unmistakable click of a rifle hammer being cocked. That's far enough, Keller. Jedediah Croft stepped out from behind a thick pine tree, his rifle leveled at my chest. His arm was in a sling, but his good hand was steady. 2 other men, rough-looking characters I'd never seen before, emerged from the trees on either side of him. They had me surrounded. You've been a busy man, Jedediah sneered. Riding through the night, something important you had to mail? My heart sank. He'd been watching me. He knew. I don't know what you're talking about, I said, my hands held high. Don't play dumb with me, he snarled. We followed you. We know you went to the stage depot. Now you're going to turn around and we're all going to ride back to your cabin. You're going to hand over the woman. Then maybe, just maybe, my friends and I won't leave your body here for the wolves. I had no choice. I slowly turned my horse around, my mind racing, desperately searching for a way out. There was none. I had failed. I had led them right back to her. The ride back was a funeral march. I was a dead man walking, and worse, I had signed Willow's death warrant. When we reached the clearing and my cabin came into view, my stomach twisted into a knot of despair. Get her out here, Jedediah yelled. The cabin door remained shut. I'm not going to ask again, Keller, he shouted, pressing the rifle barrel into my back. Willow, I called out, my voice hoarse. It's over. Come on out. The door creaked open. Willow stepped out, the shotgun held tightly in her hands. Her face was pale, but her chin was high. See? Jedediah said with a triumphant grin. Now we can... He was cut off by the sound of horses. Lots of horses. Coming fast. Jedediah and his men spun around, their faces a mixture of confusion and alarm. A dozen riders burst from the trees surrounding the cabin, their rifles drawn and ready. They were ranchers, my neighbors. Men like old John Sterling and young Billy Croft. I'd lived alongside them for years, traded with them, helped them brand their cattle. Old man Sterling, his face like a weathered piece of leather, rode forward, his ancient Winchester resting comfortably in the crook of his arm. Jedediah Croft, he said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of authority. My boy saw you and your friends sneaking around Keller's property yesterday. We don't take kindly to strangers skulking in the shadows around here. Jedediah was stunned. This is none of your business, old man. This is official bounty work. Don't look official to me, Sterling said, spitting a stream of tobacco juice near Croft's boot. Looks to me like 3 men holding a gun on my friend. Around here we call that a disagreement, and we tend to side with our friends. Jedediah looked at the dozen rifles all pointed directly at him. His face turned purple with rage. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and outmaneuvered. He glared at me, his eyes promising a bloody revenge he knew he couldn't deliver. "This ain't over, Keller," he hissed. He and his men slowly lowered their weapons, turned their horses, and rode away, disappearing back into the forest. I just sat there on my horse, stunned, as my neighbors lowered their own rifles. Willow ran to my side, her eyes filled with tears of relief. "How?" I asked Sterling, my voice choked with gratitude. "Willow," he said with a nod toward her. "She rode out like a demon was on her tail the minute you left. Woke up half the county, told us you were in some kind of trouble, that men were after you both. We Kellers and Sterlings and Crofts, we might have our squabbles, but we're Wyoming folks. We look after our own." I looked at Willow, who was now weeping freely. She hadn't just waited. She hadn't just hoped. She had acted. She had saved me. She had saved us. That night, for the first time, the cabin felt truly safe. It felt like a home. The threat from Jedediah was gone, scattered by the simple, unshakable loyalty of good neighbors. But the larger threat, the Williams family, still loomed. All we could do was wait. 3 weeks later, the stagecoach brought a package. It was a thick bundle of newspapers, all of them from St. Louis, sent by my friend Jacob. The headline on the front page of the St. Louis Chronicle screamed across the top in giant bold letters, "Banking Baron Scandal, Secret Wife, Hidden Heir, and Murder for Hire Plot Exposed." The story was all there. Jacob had done his work. He'd found the preacher who performed the secret wedding. He'd found witnesses who confirmed Henry and Willow's relationship. My letter was printed in full, a scathing first-hand account. The story was a firestorm, tearing through St. Louis high society. The Williams family was ruined. Their reputation was shattered. Their power, built on a foundation of lies, had crumbled to dust. Tucked into the newspapers was a short, handwritten note from Jacob. "Wyatt, they're finished. The old man is facing federal charges. Henry has disappeared, rumored to have fled to South America. You won't be hearing from them again. I think your Willow Green is safe now. Stay well, my friend. You've done a good thing. Jacob." I read the note aloud to Willow. She stood by the window, looking out at the mountains, her hands resting on her now prominent belly. The long nightmare was over. She was free. She turned to me, her gray eyes clear and bright, free from the shadows of fear, for the first time since I'd met her. "You saved my life, Wyatt," she whispered. "No," I said, walking over to her. I gently took her hand. We saved each other. That spring, as the last of the snow melted and the wild Wyoming flowers began to bloom, Willow gave birth to a healthy baby boy. He had his mother's stormy eyes and, I like to think, my stubborn chin. We named him Zachary. The law never came asking about Silas Croft. His death was just another unsolved mystery in a land full of them. As far as the world was concerned, he and Winifred Gladstone had both vanished in the great blizzard of '75, and in their place, a new family began. Willow never made it to California. She found her new life right here, in a small log cabin, with a quiet rancher who had been foolish enough to ride out in a storm. What started with blood in the snow had, against all odds, blossomed into love. We built a life together. Zachary grew tall and strong, and his laughter filled the spaces that had once been filled with silence and fear. Sometimes on a cold winter's night, with the wind howling outside, Willow and I will look at each other across the hearth, and we don't have to say a word. We both remember that first terrifying night. We remember the lies, the fear, the guns. We remember the impossible choice I made, to trust a stranger against all reason. Some choices define a man's life. That was mine. And I'd make it again, every single time. The world is full of powerful men who think they can write the ending to everyone else's story. But every now and then, they come up against people who refuse to be erased. People who decide to write their own ending, even if it costs them everything. If you believe in fighting for your own story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And I'll see you in the next one.